Awesome. Thank you, Neha. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Energy Star webinar, To Efficiency and Beyond, Strategies for Improving Energy Performance. As Neha mentioned, my name is Maddie, and I'm an implementation support contractor for the Energy Star Commercial and Industrial Buildings program. So thank you to everyone who is joining us for this third webinar in the three-part series on the role of EPA's Energy Star Portfolio Manager tool in facilitating successful benchmarking law compliance. Thank you also to everyone who filled out the pre-webinar poll for today. It looks like most people did attend part 2. So thank you for filling that out. If you missed part 1 or 2 for any reason, we are going to be hosting this entire series again, starting tomorrow on May 9th, with the second one on May 22nd. We also have recordings of past series as well as the slide decks for those webinars on the link in the slide deck. And with that, the slide deck for today was sent out to all registrants, and we'll be sending it again after today's session. So today's session is really geared towards people who are still just getting started with energy management, and perhaps have limited or no experience implementing energy savings projects at their building. So we don't have a large number of learning objectives for today, but the two that we do have are pretty substantial in content. So first, we're going to talk about recommendations for developing an energy management action plan. And when we say action plan, sometimes it can seem intense or complex, but today we're going to be focusing on something that is simple and oriented towards getting your plan on paper so that you can identify the concrete actions that you can take in a specific order. Then we'll talk about different ways to identify opportunities for low and no cost energy savings and the steps you can take to put those opportunities into practice, moving from the first step of identification and all the way through to implementation. As we go through these learning objectives today, if you do have questions, we are going to have a 15-minute Q&A session at the end of our presentation today. So if you have questions, please feel free to type them into the chat. I think we mentioned this, but you can access the chat by going over in the bottom right-hand side of your screen. There's a chat bubble icon. You can just type in your question to the host, and we'll address it at the end of today's session. Okay, so if you joined our part 2 session in April, then you might remember this diagram. So just to navigate it real quick, if you are attending this series because you are required to benchmark via state or local ordinance, you are likely at the top of the funnel here where the arrow is. And this is where you'd be if you have just started benchmarking to comply with a local law. In many cases, compliance with state or local benchmarking law is focused on just this first step, which is the benchmarking step, and that is extremely important. But as we discussed in the previous webinars in this series, the benchmarking itself is not going to save energy at your building. It's what you do with that information and the data that you've collected through the benchmarking process, and then through the strategic approach to energy management at your property. That is where you get some meaningful action and where you can actually recognize your achievements. So those actions that we'll take after benchmarking is what we're focusing on today. Right in this donut section of the diagram. We will touch on the others as well, but we're going to mainly be focusing on that first box. And just to dissect it a little bit, the bottom half here is where you would be once you begin to create and implement your action plan. And one thing we like to emphasize here is continuous improvement. So this process isn't just one and done, check the box process, and it can be up and down. It might not be a straight linear process. The idea here is to assess your performance over time, continuously reevaluate, and then set new goals based on that evaluation. So once you've completed the steps from part 1 and part 2 of our webinar series, then you're probably here. Create an action plan. And today's session is going to dive into the basics of developing your energy management plan and some low and no cost actions that you can take right now to start saving energy, money, and also reducing your building's carbon footprint. So the big question, as I'm sure you're asking yourself, is who is actually going to put this together? So everyone in your organization is making decisions every day that impact energy use in both small and large ways, depending on what their job is. Whether it's remembering to turn the light off when they're leaving a conference room, how much hot water they're using when they're washing their hands or what have you, and then when they're going home for the day, putting the computer to sleep or turning it off. And an energy team can help integrate energy management into these day-to-day activities across all of the departments in the organization. The size of your energy team does vary based on the size of your organization, of course, and it's going to take a team. It is great to take a team approach to the extent that you can, but if your organization is small and perhaps has just one or two people focusing on energy management, that can still be extremely effective to help your organization get to where you want to be. So as you begin to pull together your management team, there will be primarily 4 big decisions that they will make as a team. So the first question is, how are you going to collect and track your data? This has been the focus primarily of the prior 2 sessions in the webinar series, where we focused a lot on Portfolio Manager and tracking your building's energy data. So we also talked about the actual methods for data collection and ways to interpret that information. So making sure that there's a standardized process for that benchmarking is very important. So the next step is, or the next question that you'll want to ask yourself is, what baseline period are we going to use? So what's the period of time that you're going to use to compare your performance in the future with? We did talk about setting goals and baselines in part 2 of the webinar series. In Portfolio Manager, there are a ton of ways to set baselines, so you can refer to that as well. And then the third question you're going to want to ask yourself is, what key performance indicators you are going to use to track that progress. So Portfolio Manager allows you to calculate a ton of different metrics, and these can range from energy use intensity, Energy Star score, total costs, greenhouse gas metrics, etc. There's so many metrics to choose from to actually establish those KPIs. And then for folks who are benchmarking multiple buildings, you do have the option to set either property level goals or portfolio-wide goals. And then once you decide that, there's always a question of which building or buildings are you going to actually prioritize within your portfolio. So in last month's session, we did talk about using energy use intensity as a means of comparing similar buildings in a smaller local portfolio to identify the outliers and the best performing buildings, to use that information and prioritize which buildings to make energy improvements on. If it sounds like you and you do have multiple buildings, we just want to highlight a few considerations to prioritize. So these are 4 characteristics that you might want to consider when you're prioritizing your the buildings to focus on within your portfolio. So if you have a larger portfolio and limited resources, you might not be able to make energy upgrades to every single one of your buildings, obviously, so you will have to prioritize and decide which buildings to start with. So Portfolio Manager can help you rank your building's performance according to the criteria that you want. And from there, you can try and identify which building or buildings you are going to work on. So you could focus on buildings with low Energy Star scores or buildings that have had stagnant scores where prior efforts to kind of like push that needle forward just haven't really been working. You could also look into buildings with a lot of mechanical issues and failing equipment. Um, or perhaps you can focus on a building that is getting more occupant complaints. And you can really use a variety of these criteria and mix and match and weigh them differently depending on what your organization's needs are. So, given all of this information about your energy management team, we do have our first and only pop quiz for the day, so we can open that up. And it says, which of the following is not a decision that your energy management team will make in the initial scoping phase? And I'll give you about 30 seconds to read through and answer the question. You can access the polling panel. It's on the right side of your screen, and you should be able to fill that out. Okay, people are still answering, but like 99% of folks have gotten the correct answer, which is good. It means folks are paying attention. But yes, the majority of folks are answering with the answer B. So the type of HVAC system that you're going to install at your property, that could be perhaps an important decision once you've developed your plan, and that is a step that needs to be taken. But at the beginning of your process, right at the outset, when you're just beginning to develop a plan, A, C, and D would be those kind of front end considerations that you're going to want to make. Those specific considerations about equipment and full retrofits will be made much further down the line once you address those first three items. And this kind of leads into this next graphic that we'll be kind of going over, which kind of demonstrates the staged approach to energy management. So now that you have kind of selected your building or buildings that you're prioritizing, it's time to get started with your upgrades. So let's say that you've got your energy team together and you've got your benchmarking results with other data sources that you've used to help choose what buildings to prioritize. And perhaps you've identified one or a few buildings that you want to start with. The EPA does recommend this stage approach. So this is kind of the guiding structure from the Energy Star Building Upgrade Manual, which is linked on the slide. And there are definitely some variations to this approach that might order the steps slightly differently or name them differently perhaps, but this is just one example that's been shown to be very effective. And the staged approach accounts for interactions among the energy flows in your buildings that are associated with each stage. So each stage includes changes that will increase the energy savings from upgrades performed in subsequent stages. So you can kind of think of it as an additive process. And with each step, you are like building on what you have already done, and that creates positive spillover effects for that energy savings. So this approach is really intended to get the most bang for your buck from those early stages of reducing energy waste through low and no cost operations and maintenance, or O&M, and then using that as the foundation which you're building all of your subsequent energy management activities. All right. And since today's presentation, we are going to be focusing on those low and no cost improvements. We're really just focusing on these first two steps, O&M and then lighting upgrades. Over the years, the EPA has found that O&M can deliver 10 to 30% in annual savings through these low and no cost opportunities. And so there's a lot of progress that you can make and a lot of money you can save just through these steps. Today we're really looking at ways you can start to make progress towards your energy and cost savings before those larger capital projects. So let's get started with this first step, O&M. Okay. So improving the operations and maintenance of your building will often start with an energy assessment. And we have 4 types of energy assessments listed on the slide here. Certainly, it's not absolutely necessary to do an energy assessment. There are plenty of best practices, checklists, guidelines you can use. And we do have some of these resources with Energy Star linked at the end of the presentation. But getting down to the basics can really have an impact on your energy performance, and an energy assessment can help you get there. And it can be really useful for uncovering a lot of those valuable O&M low cost or no cost opportunities. So the first step in the process is benchmarking and generating your Energy Star score. So if you've already done that, then you've already started the process. But if you can think of that Energy Star score, or EUI if you're using that metric, kind of like a check engine light in a car, and imagine it that way, then it can give you the information that something's kind of going on that you need to investigate. But it doesn't necessarily tell you the reasoning why why the light's gone on. So if you have a low Energy Star score, or in this metaphor that we're using, if the check engine light is on, then the energy assessment would kind of take your car into the shop, pop the hood, and actually see what's going on. So it can be, just to hammer it in, the energy assessment can be a really useful way to see what's actually going on inside your building. So if you do want to kind of dig into your score and find those ways to improve it, there are a few ways to conduct an energy assessment, and each of those ways does require different levels of expertise and perhaps also financial resources. The next section, we're going to kind of stay in the realm of these first 2 items on the slide, the informal walkthrough and the Energy Star energy treasure hunt. An informal walkthrough is getting the facilities and engineering staff within your organization to really just walk through the building and take a focused look at all building systems to see if any clear instances could be identified, and to see if there are any quick items that can be resolved. And today we're going to also, as I mentioned, highlight the Energy Star treasure hunts as a great opportunity to identify low and no cost quick fixes with a pretty short payback period. The benefits of the treasure hunt is primarily the engagement with the employees and other building staff or students that can be driven through this kind of treasure hunt approach. And the Energy Star partners that have used energy treasure hunts have reduced their facilities' energy use by up to 15%. So let's talk about what an Energy Star energy treasure hunt actually is. So treasure hunts focus on identifying these low or no cost quick fixes, typically ones that do have that short payback period. And the goal here is to identify a number of improvements that can be made immediately and without significant expenditures or any capital investments. And what really makes a treasure hunt special compared to that informal walkthrough, which was that first option, is that they focus on engaging your staff and employees. They can, of course, be supplemented with outside experts or consultants if you want, but the um, real kind of benefit here is that you're engaging your staff. They're, as you can see from the photo on the slide, where folks kind of dressed up and embraced the kind of pirate treasure hunt a little bit. They are really intended to strike that positive tone. They focus on those positive outcomes and improvements that you can make on your day-to-day. They can also engage your senior management and kind of financial makers and get them involved to ensure that the ideas that are identified during the treasure hunt actually get implemented. And as a result of that treasure hunt, it can be a great way to kickstart the development of your energy action plan. So through the process of actually undertaking that treasure hunt, you're going to do a lot of work regarding kind of laying out your plan for the next steps to improve the energy performance of your building. Now, you might think that based on that brief description of a treasure hunt, it does sound quite a bit like an energy audit. And in some ways, they're not too different. They both do involve identifying specific actions to be taken at your building to improve its energy performance. But what's special about the treasure hunt and what makes them usually a little more effective than traditional energy assessments and audits is that tone that it sets. And a lot of times they can be a lot less threatening and often even really fun for the employees. Um, like if an outsider comes to an organization for an energy audit and kind of declares that they're here to assess the building, it can be a little intimidating to folks, and that may lead to a limiting in sharing ideas or kind of thinking outside the box. So in many ways, treasure hunts are engaged around the rebranding of the work that the energy managers do kind of every day. And by focusing on these positive outcomes as opposed to searching for problems, like the goal here in the treasure hunt is to quite literally find that treasure. And in this case, the treasure is the O&M opportunities, behavioral opportunities, low cost opportunities that can deliver those quick wins. So we do recognize that it can be a little difficult undertaking this treasure hunt in a hybrid work scenario, which a lot of offices are still operating under. And so if this does sound like you, we have kind of laid out here what parts of the treasure hunt can be conducted remotely versus on site. And the actual building walkthrough process is like the actual treasure hunt event was identified as the only step that should be done on site. And so it's just that one step in the process that has to be done in person. And we've found that it can be a great sense of camaraderie, kind of bringing folks together after perhaps working remotely for so long. So just something to consider as well if you have been operating under that hybrid work environment. And we don't need to go into detail here because I think at most, for most people, this might not super apply anymore, but we just want to remind you that there are steps that can be taken if you are operating remotely. So perhaps you can do some virtual treasure hunting or doing the other steps that we identified remotely as well. All right, and the important thing here is that treasure hunts can be performed for any commercial building types, and the EPA has published a series of property type specific treasure maps, including the sectors that are shown here on screen. So if your building does not fall into a category included by these bullets, there is a general treasure map that applies to all other commercial buildings. But depending on your property type, the map will have specific examples of things to look out for in your building. And here is an example of what you might find in one of these treasure maps. So this one's for multifamily properties. And even if you're not planning to do a formal treasure hunt, I do highly recommend checking out your property's map. They do provide kind of a hit list of things that you can go through and look for in your building, even if you're not hosting a formal treasure hunt. Um, so even if you are just doing kind of that informal walkthrough, it can be a great help to look at this. Now, on the treasure hunt section of the Energy Star website, which is linked on slide 22 down here, um, there is a number of resources there, including not just the treasure maps, but also data collection worksheets and other resources that you can use during your treasure hunt. So some of the resources on that link are mini case studies, and we'll go over a few of them today. Um, there is an option for organizations that have implemented treasure hunts to kind of report back to EPA what their experience was like and what their savings were. And we just pulled out a small handful here. This isn't broadly representative, but rather just indicative of the kinds of things that can be found on a treasure hunt. So this first example, we have Emily Residential, which was a multifamily property organization, and they undertook a treasure hunt at one property. They formed a team of 5 people, and the top opportunities that they identified involved checking and correcting temperature set points, insulating water pipes, and activating power management settings in their business center and in their leasing office. Um, you can see here that those were small savings, but pretty simple to implement. So around about $8,000 in savings. Probably not a huge deal when you consider the operating expenses associated with a multifamily housing property like this one. But at the same time, if someone left, you know, $8,000 to $10,000 just lying around, I think we would all pick it up. So the idea here is that these O&M opportunities can be really implemented just at the start, and there may be money there just for the taking for your organization. So our second case study, we see a similar example here with Bozzuto Management Company. This was done in an office property, and in this case, there were 10 folks on the treasure hunt, so a little bit more than the last one. And in addition to O&M opportunities like standardizing thermostat settings, they also looked into lighting and controls a little bit. That's not technically O&M, but as we'll talk about in a minute, lighting is a very secure and predictable payback. So it's often one of the first places that folks do go after they've handled O&M. In this case, there's the installation of lighting controls and sensors, as well as the targeted LED retrofits, and their annual savings was about $10,000 for that single building, just from doing the treasure hunt. Now, this third and final example we have here is with a high school, Sherwood High School. You can see that the treasure hunt team was 24 people, so quite bigger than the other two. And especially in these K-12 settings, we do see treasure hunts can be great opportunities for getting together not just building staff, but also the students. And there can be some pretty significant educational opportunities for them to learn about energy management practices, which isn't often in the core curriculum. So when we talk about the O&M savings for this property, they're pretty simple. You know, turn off classroom lights when you're not using them, keeping the classroom doors closed when classes are in session to keep the air conditioning inside of the classrooms, occupancy sensors where they're appropriate, timers on their TVs, turning off smart boards when they're not in use. So quite a bit of opportunities identified here. And the more people you have on your energy treasure hunt team, and especially the more folks who come from outside of a formal energy background, the greater opportunity that you're going to identify kind of really creative and cool ways that might not have otherwise been apparent. Okay, so just to summarize real quick about treasure hunts, Why do we think they're important? Well, it's really because there are a lot of opportunities for energy savings, as well as cost savings and greenhouse gas emission savings that can be realized through a fairly low lift approach, and they can be really fun for everyone involved. It's kind of a win-win. So you can identify those low cost energy savings opportunities, and you can generate the involvement from multiple groups within your buildings. So the outcomes from a treasure hunt are going to be really important for helping you scope out your energy management plan moving forward. Okay, so here's our list from before about identifying opportunities for savings with an energy assessment. We talked about informal walkthroughs briefly, and we just talked about the Energy Star treasure hunt. So we did just want to acknowledge these other two energy assessment options. Because you might be wondering why we're not going into great detail on those. Um, these two options include the formal retro commissioning or recommissioning, which is really focused on identifying where building systems have kind of gotten out of sync over time and how they can be brought back to the intended operation. And also so that different building systems are not contradicting one another. And retro commissioning is usually focused on O&M, although it's not necessarily exclusively, but that's kind of the focus on how to get the building operating as it should. And then the last one is ASHRAE level 2 or 3 energy audits. And these are assessments that might include low and no cost energy control measures, but they're really intended to identify and prioritize those capital expenditures. So we're just not focusing on them today because they do tend to be a little more costly, and today's really about those low and no cost opportunities. So in both of those cases, the retro commissioning or recommissioning and the ASHRAE level 2 or 3 energy audit, those are going to be provided by third parties. And this is kind of where technical assistance that the Energy Star program kind of ends and where the market solutions begin. So because the energy program itself, can't actually come out and do that energy audit or retro commissioning studies at your building. So that said, there are plenty of resources out there in the marketplace to help you do those things. And the first thing would be to reach out to your local utility. So most utilities have technical assistance resources to help you identify trusted contractors in your local area that usually have financial resources like incentives or rebates, and those can help building owners get those energy assessments done. And we also encourage you to reach out to the Energy Star service and product provider partners who have demonstrated that they're using Energy Star tools and resources like Portfolio Manager to help their customers achieve their energy savings. And most utilities offer resources to help you identify a contractor who can perform the services you're wanting. And a lot of utilities do offer incentives for audits and retro commissioning. So we just have some tips here for choosing a provider, including asking for multiple references that you can contact, asking the company to provide the actual cost estimate beforehand, making sure they are in fact currently licensed, that it's not expired, and that they're also insured, and that the company should also certify that their work does conform to the state and local jurisdictions. And also to verify that the company carries a workers' compensation insurance as well. So those are just some things to consider when you're choosing your provider. As I mentioned, we do have a list of Energy Star service and product provider partners that you can reach out to, and we do have a list on our website of our most active service and product providers. And so I would recommend you search this list and see if what they offer are in line with what you're looking for. The link to this website is on the slide, but also at the end of the presentation. And this list mainly focus on providers who are helping their customers benchmark. But again, it would be just a starting point, and their list of services do go well beyond that. So if you're on the line and you are a service and product provider who wants to be added to this list, the way to do that is to get a property benchmarked. All right, folks, we're about halfway, so I'm just going to grab a quick sip of water and then get right back into it. And since we are about halfway, I'll remind folks who might have joined late that if you have any questions, we will be addressing those in our Q&A at the end of today's session. You can send your questions to the host through the chat on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. And yeah, we'll touch on that at the end. And thanks to everyone who submitted questions already. All right, so let's move on. So here's this chart that we saw before. We focused on O&M, and I'll just highlight again to kind of summarize. Treasure hunts, Energy Star treasure hunts are the things that can typically be organized and implemented internally. And when we start talking about those more detailed assessments like a retro commissioning or audit, that's when we start talking about kind of needing to reach out to other market players. So in addition to O&M, lighting upgrades are sometimes the most common kind of low-hanging fruit when it comes to energy management. I will preface that a large-scale comprehensive lighting upgrade will cost money, so we're not calling these lighting upgrades no cost. And depending on the scale, they might not even be low cost, again, depending on the scale. That being said, lighting is often the first step that people do take when they're addressing the energy performance of their building. Because compared to other large building systems, lighting projects do tend to be relatively inexpensive and relatively easy to implement. And generally, they provide a quick and reliable return on investment for you. And lighting retrofits have been happening for a long time, so there's quite a bit of understanding and validation of that cost benefit of lighting upgrades. So in the world of energy efficiency improvements, it is likely that a lighting upgrade is going to be pretty palatable for those decision makers, even if they aren't experts on energy efficiency. And since this lighting upgrades is kind of a tried and true strategy, we just want to talk about a couple of ideas to take a look at the options that are available to your building in terms of lighting upgrades. So like when you would want to reach out to a utility or vendor in the market to really understand the savings potential of your building. So we do have some quick tips for a successful lighting project upgrade. And the first is to always start with your local utility. So in addition to those potential O&M incentives that we mentioned, a lot of utilities still offer LED lighting incentives and rebates as well. So some utilities in the most progressive and aggressive states in terms of pursuing energy reductions might see lighting rebates start to dial down over time. If the utility decides that everyone's doing it, then they don't need to incentivize it anymore. Who knows? That's generally the case in a few states, but generally utilities are going to have lighting incentives available that you can take advantage of. You can also use the Energy Star rebate finder, which we've linked here on the slide in blue, and you can use that to identify rebates available for energy saving light bulbs based on your location. And there's a pretty extensive product finder that you can help dial in on specific models of products that have the Energy Star label, and that's linked on the slide as well here in blue. So as you're getting started with lighting retrofits, we do have a few tips here. So if your lighting is still working on kind of older fluorescent systems, there's opportunity right there. So it'd be a good choice for you to look for those higher efficiency fluorescent or newer technology that can replace some of those fluorescents. At the same time, if you recently made the transition from incandescent lighting to CFL, maybe it would be a good time to look at the new technology that can further save you energy beyond what you've already achieved. That might be low-hanging fruit, or that might not even be applicable for a lot of the folks here, but I still wanted to call it out here. And then another great opportunity is exit signs. So you might not be using incandescent exit signs anymore. You might have already moved to CFL at some point in the past, but it's always a good time to look at the opportunity to further improve those energy savings through your exit signs. And then the final thing we have here is to install occupancy sensors to automatically turn off lights when no one is present and turn them back on when folks return. And these can save between 15 and 30% on your lighting costs. You can start installing these in low occupancy areas of your building, like conference rooms, storage closets, things like that. And I also just wanted to point out here that as you're making these changes, it's important to keep in mind that good equipment can still be installed incorrectly. So just make sure not to install those occupancy sensors behind a coat rack, door, bookcase, things like that, because it does have to be able to kind of see that person approaching to actually turn on the light as they enter that room. Okay, so let's get into actually developing your energy management plan. So we focused a lot on the session on treasure hunts because they are a pretty valuable framework for identifying your energy savings opportunities, and especially those that are related to operations and maintenance. And we did talk briefly about lighting upgrades, but let's say that you've gone through your energy treasure hunt and you've identified a long list of kind of small items that you want to begin implementing, as well as perhaps some bigger ticket items that you're probably not going to be able to do this year, but you still want to have it on your radar for the future. So considering all that, how would you start developing your energy management plan? Again, during this session, we're not going to go like step by step for the energy management plan, but we're going to go over a high level set of considerations to keep in mind. So number one, start small again. So like we kind of discussed in that staged approach to energy management chart, you do really want to start by focusing on those low and no cost O&M measures and lighting upgrades. And maybe the first version of your plan only includes these steps, but that's okay. Because creating that plan to get these things gone is a great first step. And you certainly want to focus on optimizing the operations of your current building system before you look into those capital intensive upgrades. Because of course you don't want to start spending money on new equipment if you still haven't kind of right-sized your building's energy requirements through more basic measures. Okay, the second step is kind of focusing on timelines and aligning your goals with time horizons. So some big questions you might want to ask yourself are what can you do in the current budget cycle? What can you do next year or in the next budget cycle? And how about long term? What can you do in the next 3 to 5 years? And setting the important thing here is that by starting small with those low or no cost kind of quick wins, we have found time and time again that this is a great way to generate buy-in from your senior management and your decision makers around energy efficiency. And getting buy-in from senior management through those successful O&M measures first can give you the opportunity to pursue those more capital intensive upgrades down the road. So lastly, this third step is to develop a process where you are continuously evaluating and reevaluating your process and your goals, because it's not just one and done, right? You want to have that continual improvement, like our chart here. This is again, we saw this at the beginning. This is the strategic energy management diagram that we pulled together because it does have this feedback loop. The idea is that as you work through your action plan, it's always important to continuously benchmark your building to understand how your building's performance is or is not improving. if you're not seeing the results that you expected, and then it's time to troubleshoot and ask what didn't happen. This continuous improvement approach does recognize that there's always more savings to be found, and even with a top of the line building, over time, things might fall out of line. So taking that continuous improvement approach makes it more likely that you're going to find and address those issues as they pop up so that you can maintain and not just achieve those high building performances. Okay, with all of that said, we are hoping that you are all excited to go out and start pulling together an energy management plan for your property or for your portfolio of properties. And kind of the whole point of this training was to show that getting started with your energy management does not have to be scary and it doesn't have to be expensive. There are things that you can do right now to get started, and you can make a lot of progress between this year and the next year. For those of you facing benchmarking ordinance that might have reporting deadlines coming up, it's important to think of that reporting deadline as a jumping off point rather than an end point. So whatever your building's energy use intensity or maybe your Energy Star score was this year, again, that's just a starting point. The big question is between now and the same time next year, what can you do? How can you move that needle to show that your building has improved its energy performance, cost performance, greenhouse gas performance, etc., year over year? Because at the end of the day, that is really what we're looking to do, and this is what these benchmarking policies are seeking to do, is to drive improvement at your building. So with all of that in mind, we just wanted to give you these small changes as you move forward in 2024. So after this session today, we would love for you to whip out your journal, grab your pen, and take some time to write down just a broad outline for your energy management plan for the coming year. Especially if you don't already have one for your building, it doesn't need to be big and it does not need to be complex. As part of that plan, see if you can identify one or maybe a few more specific activities that you'd like to commit to achieving over the course of this year. And depending on where your building is now and what you've done in the past, these will probably look different for different organizations. For those of you who have attended our part 1 and 2 of this benchmarking series, this will look familiar to you. You know that there's a suite of resources within Portfolio Manager that help you analyze your progress and your performance over time. And probably the most powerful item here is the ability to define your own custom reporting template and use that to report on key metrics over time. And this last part here is we would love to hear from you in the chat window along with your questions about one goal that you think might be reasonable and achievable in the next year. So whether that's developing an energy management plan, designing and carrying out an Energy Star treasure hunt, or doing a more comprehensive assessment like an energy audit, or maybe performing a lighting retrofit, whatever it is, if you feel comfortable indicating what you'd like to get started with, we would love to hear from you in the chat. And it looks like we have some great ideas coming in. So thank you everyone for piping up. Okay, and as we close out the session here, we did just want to provide this list of resources that we have for you. Everyone, if you haven't already, will receive a copy of the slides. And these are not only the resources available from the Energy Star program related to energy management, but these also provide some good jumping off points as they refer back to specific items that we've kind of discussed over the last hour. And in addition to those specific resources, we also have some great other Energy Star program resources that can help you navigate kind of the world of energy improvement. Again, each of these should be linked, so you should be able to click right through the resources here. And as we've talked about in prior sessions, this slide might look familiar to you, but folks on this webinar might be here for a variety of reasons, but generally speaking, we do expect that you're here because you're being required to benchmark as part of a state or local jurisdiction. And we want to remind you that if you do have any questions about Portfolio Manager or any Energy Star tools and resources, you can submit those either here and we can answer it live, or you can submit those to our building's help desk. But if you have questions specifically about the requirements of your state or local jurisdiction's ordinance, those would be best directed to the actual state or local entity that's administering that ordinance. So kind of on that note, we do have some compliance specific resources linked on the slide here. These were also in the slides for sessions 1 and 2, but we just wanted to make them available to you. And the first one on the slide here, I'll just call out. This is a 15-minute video that summarizes kind of the mechanics of complying with your state and local benchmarking. And what else do we have here? Okay, here Energy Star has published a ton of FAQs that are specific to complying with your state and local benchmarking requirements. So there's a very good chance that someone else has already asked the same question and we've captured that response and linked it here. So if you have any questions about submitting your data in Portfolio Manager, this would be a great place to start. So we hope that you enjoyed today's webinar. And if you've attended all 3, then you've completed the Basics of Building Benchmarking for Ordinance Compliance webinar series. So congratulations. And that brings us to the end of our presentation. Thank you to everyone who joined for today. Again, the slides will be sent to all webinar registrants after today's session, and we can now move into our Q&A portion.